Have you ever felt that the place you sleep in silently watches you, hiding in the shadows, whispering your name in a voice only you can hear? This feeling becomes a reality in this story. The forgotten village lies deep within a dense forest, far from any known road, too distant to appear on maps. The trees there are towering, their leaves so thick that most sunlight never reaches the ground, leaving the place dark all day, even at noon. The houses in the village are half collapsed, their doors creaking sharply at the slightest movement, and the windows covered in dust and cobwebs as if they haven't been opened for decades. The streets are narrow, littered with stones both small and large, each step sounding as though something unseen is watching you from afar. The air is heavy and damp, and with every passing breeze, shadows seem to move around you, dancing in a strange way, whispering unknown secrets. A new family moved into one of these houses, ignoring the mysterious warnings from the few remaining villagers. The father, a practical man who did not believe in superstitions, told himself, "These are just stories meant to scare people. Nothing will happen to us." The mother was anxious, but tried to reassure herself. "We'll get used to this place with time. Everything will be normal." Their 7-year-old child, however, noticed from the very first day that the atmosphere was unlike anything he had ever experienced. On the first day, they discovered the house was full of hidden corners, small doors leading to abandoned spaces, and winding hallways that seemed to expand when you weren't looking directly at them. As night fell, the house began to whisper. At first, it was just a soft rustle on the windows. Then it escalated into loud knocks, as if someone were trying to get in. The child insisted he saw a faceless woman standing at the edge of the bed, her shadow dark, as if even the light feared approaching her. The parents laughed at the child's imagination, but the sounds persisted, evolving into footsteps inside the house, starting from the upper floor and ending at the front door. Yet they saw no one. At sunrise, they discovered black marks on the front door, drawn in charcoal, resembling ancient protective symbols, but inverted, as if inviting something mysterious. The few neighbors left in the village whispered, "The invitation has been opened," but offered no explanation as to for whom or why. The next day, the whispers became clearer, especially around the child, who began waking up in the middle of the night, calling for something unseen, freezing at the sound of footsteps near his room. The mother tried to calm him, and the father started realizing that this was no longer imagination, that a strange force was seeping into their lives. One night, the child left his room while asleep, running toward the forest, The mother chased him. The father followed, trying to catch him, but every step they took produced strange sounds, as if the trees themselves were moving, watching them, whispering, "Return, or you will remain here forever." Deep within the forest, they found an old graveyard with no headstones, the soil freshly turned over one grave as if waiting for someone to become its next guest. The child looked at the grave and whispered, "This is my grave." They didn't know how to interpret this, but a feeling of dread pierced their hearts. The first night in the village was only the beginning, and the shadows had yet to reveal all their secrets. The air grew colder, the whispers more intense, as if something was testing them, watching their fear, waiting for the right moment to strike. As days passed in the village, terror seeped deeper into the family's life. The shadows inside the house were no longer still. They moved on their own, crawling across the walls, vanishing, then reappearing suddenly in unexpected places. The sounds they once heard gradually shifted from faint whispers into muffled screams, as if the house itself had become a living entity, testing them, watching them, feeding on their fear. The child grew quieter during the day, but at night he wandered unconsciously, walking toward the forest, drawn by an unseen call. The mother tried to stop him many times, but she felt a hidden force pulling him, something determined to take him away from safety. The father began noticing disturbing changes in his son, his eyes widening suddenly, his face freezing, as if part of the shadows had become part of him. One night, as they tried to sleep, the power suddenly went out, plunging the entire house into darkness. The sound of the wind seeped through the doors and windows, but it wasn't ordinary wind. It carried quick, frantic thuds, like something running inside the walls. The mother clutched the child tightly, while the father searched for the source with a small flashlight. But everything was empty, though the shadows shifted around him unseen. The next morning, they discovered that their only nearby neighbor had vanished. His house was empty, with half-eaten food still on the table, as if he had left suddenly. Searching the home, they found his diary filled with frantic, trembling handwriting. The shadows move on their own, whispers from the corners. Something is always watching. The faceless woman is getting closer. Each night, the whispers grew more personal, calling each family member by name. The child could no longer sleep alone in his room, often wandering between rooms unconsciously, sometimes stopping at the windows to stare into the dark forest. The parents realized that what was happening was beyond imagination. A real force controlled the place, unseen yet present in every movement, every breath. One night, the parents decided to follow the voice calling their child. They took a flashlight and walked toward the forest. Every step echoed strangely, as if the trees themselves were speaking to them, whispering softly, "Turn back, or you will remain here forever." Suddenly, they reached a massive tree, its roots stretching like enormous arms, the ground around it carved with strange symbols glowing faintly under the flashlight's beam. The air grew icy cold, and the whispers turned into muffled screams. The child stopped suddenly, raised his hand and said, "They want me to go with them." The father tried to grab him, but an unseen force pushed him back, as if the forest itself was preventing them from leaving. Moments later, they returned to the house, only to find the front door split open, as if someone had tried to break in while they were in the forest. The mother screamed, insisting they leave immediately, but the father understood that escaping the village would not be easy, that something bound them to this place, watching every move. The next day, as they tried to plan their escape, they discovered a hidden message beneath one of the floorboards in the basement. Written in strange handwriting, it read, "All who enter the village never remain the same. The shadows wait in every corner. Survival is only possible before the third sunrise, or else you become them." As the third sunrise drew near, an unbearable sense of danger consumed the family. Every corner of the house, every shadow in the room seemed to breathe, advancing toward them with slow, deliberate steps. The mother, overcome with terror, screamed, "We must leave now, before it's too late." But the father felt rooted to the ground, as though the forest itself bound them in place, an unseen force chaining their every movement. On the final night, they gathered in the living room, surrounded by small lamps, desperately trying to stay awake. Suddenly, the floor trembled beneath their feet, followed by a piercing creak and a violent knocking on the windows and doors from every direction. The sound was so intense, it felt as if the house itself groaned under the weight of the fear filling it. The child began to cry, pointing to the shadow that had appeared suddenly in the corner. The faceless woman stood there, watching in silence. Her movements were slow, deliberate, yet terrifying. Each time they approached her, she stepped back with haunting calm, leaving behind a suffocating sense of dread. The father lunged toward her, but she vanished instantly, leaving only an ancient, deathly scent in the air, as if the shadows themselves left their mark to remind them of the danger. The mother clutched the child tightly, desperately trying to open the door, but every attempt failed. An invisible force surrounded them, locking them inside. Then, the mirrors throughout the house began to crack one by one, each fracture glowing faintly, reflecting the swarming shadows around them in a horrifying display. At the same time, the whispers grew heavier, transforming into muffled cries that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth itself. Each family member felt something drawing closer, brushing against their skin, whispering words only a terrified heart could hear. The father tried to steady his breath, but his heart raced violently, his blood freezing with fear. And then everything stopped. A suffocating silence fell upon the house. The mother clung to the child, scanning the room anxiously, while the father stared into the shadows with dread. No movement, no sound, no whispers, only a heavy, crushing stillness. Moments later, a deep chill crept in, seeping from the ground, as though the house itself was merging with the forest outside. Suddenly, a door appeared on the back wall of the living room, a door that had never been there before, standing wide open. From within, a strange whisper beckoned them to enter. The family felt it was their only choice. Ignoring it could mean the end. They stepped through the door and found themselves in a long, dark corridor, lit only by a faint glow along the floor. The walls were covered in ancient symbols, shifting and moving as if alive, trying to communicate. Each step echoed unnaturally, as though the ground itself spoke, warning them of the unknown that awaited at the end. At the corridor's end, they discovered a vast chamber, its walls engraved with countless symbols. At its center stood a stone pedestal, upon which lay an ancient book, glowing faintly with a sinister light. The book pulsed with energy, its words riving and shifting across the pages as if alive. The child approached the book and whispered, "This is what they've been searching for. This is what calls them here." The father tried to grab him, but an unseen force threw him back. The mother pulled desperately at her son, but the power binding him was stronger. Suddenly, the symbols on the walls ignited with blinding light. The whispers erupted into shrieks, and the shadows poured from the walls, surrounding the family, trapping them inside the chamber. The terror became unbearable, each passing second tightening the grip of the darkness, feeding the shadows' power. The shadows closed in tighter around the family. The whispers twisted into muffled screams that echoed from every corner of the room. The faint glow from the ancient book grew brighter, as though guiding them, whispering with an ominous authority, "Read, or remain here forever." Despite his fear, the child reached out and touched the pages. Instantly, a surge of incomprehensible energy flooded the room, binding the family to the shadows themselves. The father tried to pull the child and mother away, but found his body locked in place, gripped by an unseen hand. The pages began to turn on their own, the ancient symbols shifting into words they could understand. The curse is real. All who enter this village become part of the shadows, unless they discover the secret before the third sunrise. The mother tried to scream, but her voice dissolved into nothing, swallowed by the room itself. Everything around them blurred. The shadows moved faster, and the floor trembled violently beneath their feet, mirroring their terror. The child began reading the strange words aloud. With each phrase, pieces of the shadows dissolved, retreating as if weakened. The father seized the moment, pulling them toward the door they had entered through, but the corridor stretched unnaturally, elongating, twisting, as though the house itself was alive and determined to keep them inside. Footsteps echoed behind them, many footsteps. The shadows that followed no longer resembled mere shapes. They warped into distorted faces and twisted limbs reaching from the corridor walls. Each step forward became a test of will, every breath laced with suffocating dread. At last, they stumbled into a vast chamber, unlike anything before. The walls shimmered with glowing symbols, the air so cold their fingers burned with numbness. In the center stood a massive mirror atop a stone platform. When they looked into it, they saw themselves, but twisted, their reflections disfigured, their faces warped like the shadows themselves. The child pointed at the mirror and whispered, "That's what I'll become if we don't move quickly." Terror surged through the parents as the platform shook violently. The ancient book rose into the air, forcing its pages open once again. The whispers exploded into deafening shrieks, and the mirror erupted in a blinding white light, reflecting the shadows as they closed in. The child, trembling but resolute, read the final line etched on the page. "He who knows the secret shall leave alive, but those who linger shall remain shadows forever." With the last word, the chamber quaked. The light grew unbearable, the shadows shrieked and dissolved, and the corridor began to contract, returning to its normal form. The house shook one final time, and then silence. The father and mother grabbed the child and fled through the door, which now appeared perfectly ordinary, as if none of it had ever happened. Outside, the air was crisp, the village silent and abandoned, eerily calm, as though nothing had ever stirred. But the mother noticed something strange. The child's shadow stretched unnaturally long behind him, moving just slightly out of sync with his body. A silent reminder that part of the darkness had followed them back. The father shivered, realizing the truth. Their survival was only temporary. The village's curse was never truly broken, and the shadows were still watching. After leaving the cursed house, the family hurried toward their car, but the road back seemed longer, twisting unnaturally, as though the forest itself wanted to keep them trapped. The trees swayed like they were breathing, their colors shifting with every step. Shadows stretched across the ground, whispering with every crunch of soil beneath their feet, "You won't escape so easily." The child clutched his mother's hand tightly. His shadow dragged unnaturally long across the dirt, twitching as though it wanted to move on its own. The mother felt the chill crawl down her spine, but forced herself to ignore it, focusing on escape. The father stayed silent, scanning every tree, every movement, knowing one mistake could cost them their lives. At last, they reached the road leading out of the village. The car was there, untouched, waiting exactly as they had left it. For a brief moment, they felt relief. But from deep within the forest, something stirred. The mother caught a glimpse of movement in the dark, and in her ear a faint whisper carried on the wind, "We will meet again." The father started the engine and they sped away. The farther they drove, the thinner the forest became. Soon daylight broke through the trees, yet no one dared to speak. The silence inside the car was heavier than the night they had just endured. Each of them knew they had survived, but something had followed. In the days that followed, they tried to return to normal life, but everything had changed. The child would sometimes freeze mid-step, his eyes fixed on corners no one else could see. His shadow twitched, stretching unnaturally long in the dim light. At night, the mother swore she heard whispers in the house, echoing from the walls, voices she recognized from the village. The father felt it too. The shadows had not let them go. The child began speaking of the faceless woman, saying she appeared in his room, watching him silently. The mother tried to comfort him. The father dismissed it. But deep down, both knew the truth. The curse had not ended. Then one night, as they lay in uneasy silence, a pounding shook the front door. With each knock, the whispers grew louder, rising into shrieks. "We will return soon!" When the father opened the door, the porch was empty, but the cold night air carried a scent they knew too well, the damp, rotting breath of the ancient forest. A message left behind. The village was still waiting. The child stepped back from the doorway, his eyes wide with terror. The father glanced at the boy's shadow and his stomach dropped. It was longer now, stretching unnaturally across the floor, and as they watched, it moved ever so slightly, out of sync with the boy himself. The mother shivered as dread filled her body. The truth became clear to them all. The faceless woman, the shadows, and the village had not been left behind. They were patient. They would wait. And one day, they would return for them. After days of leaving the village, the family tried to return to their normal life, but something strange was haunting them everywhere. The child sometimes became silent, staring into the corners as if he could see what others could not. The mother noticed that the child's long shadow sometimes moved in a strange way, as if a part of the darkness had remained inside him, watching them in silence. The father felt chills running through his body every time he noticed this. One night, while the family was trying to sleep, they began to hear faint sounds from outside, light knocks on the windows and doors, muffled whispers seeping from the corners, as if something wanted to remind them that they had not completely escaped. The air became heavy, and the temperature suddenly dropped in every room until their breaths froze for a moment before their bodies regained warmth. The child looked toward the living room nervously and pointed to the corners, saying, "She is here, watching us." The mother tried to calm him, but she felt the same fear, as if the room itself was no longer familiar. The father tried to look around, but he could not see anything, despite his feeling that unseen eyes were following every move. As the weeks passed, they began to notice short shadows moving at night, sometimes disappearing, sometimes taking the shape of the faceless woman. Every time the shadow appeared, it left behind a deep sense of dread, as if a fragment of that dark energy was trying to invade their lives. The mother began to have recurring dreams. She saw the old house in the village, the forest, the graveyard, and the glowing symbols on the ground. The dreams were so vivid, as if they were real, and every time she woke up, she felt extreme cold, her hand gripping the child's hand tightly. The father felt that fear had become part of their daily life, and that the village had not lost its grip on them even after they had gone far away. And one night, while trying to sleep, they heard strong knocks on the front door. With every knock, the whispers grew louder, turning into short screams. "We will come back to you soon!" When they opened the door, they found no one, but the cold air carried the scent of the old forest, the scent of death and shadows, as if it was a clear message from the village. It was still there, and it would always be waiting. The child stepped back a little from the door, his eyes full of fear. When the father looked at his shadow, he noticed it was longer, sometimes moving independently of his body, as if part of the shadows had remained within him, silently watching and testing them. The mother felt a shiver run from her head to her feet, and each one of them realized that the village, the shadows, and the faceless woman would continue to haunt them until another chance came to strike. Every night, the doors and windows tested their silence, and every strange whisper, every movement in the corner reminded them that horror was not something they could easily escape. Even after leaving the village behind, the feeling of danger surrounded them, and the shadows that had crept into their lives never left them alone. Over time, the feeling of danger grew stronger than ever. The family could no longer sleep peacefully in their rooms, and even the slightest noise was enough to jolt them awake. The child insisted on sleeping beside his parents, sometimes staring into the corners as if he could see beings they could not. One night, the father heard footsteps outside the house, but they weren't human footsteps. They were heavy, strangely rhythmic, stopping suddenly and then moving quickly, as if the ground itself shifted with the shadows. The father shone his flashlight toward the outside, but he saw nothing, only the swaying trees, as if they were watching. The child began whispering in a low voice, "She's here, watching us from the shadows." The mother tried to comfort him, but her heart was racing, a shiver spreading through every part of her body. The shadows that had entered their lives were no longer confined to the village. They had followed them into the house, into the rooms, and even the hallways. One day, the father discovered that the shadows could move through pictures and mirrors. Every time he looked at a family portrait on the wall, he felt as though the shadows shifted behind the figures, smiling with a sinister grin. The mother began to notice subtle changes in the child, uncontrollable movements in his fingers, or his eyes trembling without reason. Then came the day they discovered an old notebook hidden in the attic, filled with strange messages. On one page, it read, "Those who know the secret will survive, but those who don't will become part of the shadows." With every word, the atmosphere in the room grew heavier, as if the dark energy was renewing itself, summoning something they had yet to
uncover. The following night, while they were sleeping, the child suddenly screamed out, "She wants me." The mother and the neighbors rushed into his room to find him standing by the window, staring into the dark forest. There was nothing visible, yet the terror was real, as though something was approaching the house, seeping inside through the shadows. The father decided to confront the matter directly, taking the child into the forest, where they faced the first great signs of danger: tree roots moving like arms, muffled voices rising from the ground, and ancient symbols glowing on the soil. The child pointed to a mysterious shape among the trees and said, "She's here, waiting for me." Returning home did not bring them safety. They noticed the shadows were thicker in every corner, moving on their own, whispering in a chilling voice, "We will come back for you." The mother felt the cold seep into her bones, and the father realized that what had happened in the village was not just a single event. It was the beginning of a new world of horror that would follow them forever.
As the weeks passed, the atmosphere in the house grew heavy with constant fear. The smallest sounds became deafening, and the shadows grew bolder, moving across the walls as though watching them every second. The child no longer spoke much. He simply stared into the corners blankly, as if part of the shadows had already become part of him. One night, as they were trying to sleep, the faint tapping on the windows turned into rapid, pounding knocks. The mother clutched the child tightly, and the father searched for the source with his flashlight, but everything was empty. Suddenly, the faceless woman appeared in the corner of the room, moving slowly, silently, yet her presence filled the space with paralyzing terror. The child began to cry, pointing at the woman. "She wants me to go with her." The mother tried to calm him, but fear gripped every member of the family. The father attempted to step toward the shadow, but an unseen force held him back. Every step he tried to take grew heavier, as though the very air had turned thick and impenetrable, preventing them from resisting. The next day, they realized the shadows were no longer confined to the house. They had begun appearing in photographs, in mirrors, and in corners they had never noticed before. The mother shivered when she looked into the mirror and saw a tall shadow moving behind the child's reflection, watching them silently. Then came the day they discovered a hidden message behind the large painting in the living room, written in strange handwriting. "Those who know the secret will survive, but those who don't will become part of the shadows." The message reignited the fear within them, as though the words themselves breathed life into the darkness and summoned the shadows again. The following night, they awoke to the child's scream, "She's here! She's going to take me!" The mother and neighbors rushed into the room to find him standing before the window, staring into the dark forest. Nothing visible stood outside, But the terror was real. Something was approaching the house, testing them in silence. The father chose to confront the horror directly, taking the child into the forest, where they encountered moving tree roots, muffled voices rising from the ground, and ancient glowing symbols etched into the soil. The child pointed toward a dark figure among the trees and whispered, "She's waiting for me, there." Returning home offered no safety. The shadows had grown thicker in every corner, moving on their own and whispering in a chilling voice, "We will come back for you." The mother felt the cold crawl deep into her bones, and the father realized that what happened in the village was not a single event. It was the beginning of a new world of horror, one that would haunt them wherever they went. The days that followed were filled with unending fear and terror. The family could no longer leave the house easily. Every corner was haunted by shadows, and every small sound made them feel as if something was drawing closer, without ever stopping. The child grew more anxious, sometimes screaming for no apparent reason, pointing to empty spaces and saying, "She's here, watching us." One night, the father noticed that the shadows had begun to take shape, horrifying figures with twisted faces and unnatural limbs, moving slowly through the house, vanishing and reappearing as if toying with their fear. The mother felt chills crawl across her skin as she began hearing strange whispers, calling them to the forest, back to the place where the nightmare had begun. The child could no longer sleep in his room, insisting on staying beside his parents through the night. At one point, he began speaking in a low voice. "She wants me to go with her. I can't resist." The mother tried to soothe him, but she felt the same terror, as if part of the shadows had already invaded his body and bound itself to him in a way that defied explanation. The father decided to face it once more, taking the child into the dark forest, where the old markings glowed faintly on the ground, mysterious symbols and roots that writhed like massive arms. There, they felt a powerful presence watching, surrounding them from all sides, as though the forest itself had become a living entity seeking to claim them. Suddenly, the faceless woman appeared again, moving slowly between the trees, her lack of features amplifying the suffocating fear. The child pointed at her and whispered, "She's waiting for me. I can't escape." The father tried to grab him and pull him away from the forest, but an unseen force shoved them back, as though the very ground refused to let them leave. Returning home brought no safety. They soon realized the shadows had multiplied in every corner, moving independently and stretching until they became part of every room. The mother felt the cold sinking into her bones, and the father understood at last that what had happened in the village had not been a single event. It was the beginning of a new world of horror that would follow them wherever they went. The next night, the child began hearing strange voices, messages whispered from the shadows. "You will return to me sooner or later." The mother and father trembled with dread, realizing that their struggle with the darkness was far from over. The village, with its mystery and its power, would forever haunt their lives. The night had grown darker than ever before, and the family felt that the shadows were no longer just something surrounding them. They had become a living entity, watching every movement, every breath, every step. The child no longer spoke except in a low whisper, staring at empty corners and pointing, saying, "She's here. Don't leave me alone." The mother tried to comfort him, but a powerful shiver coursed through her body as she began hearing strange whispers seeping from the walls, the floor, every corner of the house. The father tried to appear strong, yet the same dread crept inside him, as if the shadows had seeped into his heart, attempting to claim every part of him. That same night, the house itself began to stir with unnatural sounds. Loud knocks against the doors and windows, footsteps echoing above them, muffled cries hanging in the air. The boy screamed, "She wants me! You can't stop her!" The mother clutched him tightly, while the father searched for the source, but everything was empty, and the shadows moved without rest. In a desperate attempt to survive, the family decided to return to the forest, the place where it had all begun. Carrying a flashlight, they walked into the dense woods, each step echoing strangely, as though the trees were breathing and the earth shifted beneath their feet. Suddenly, the faceless woman appeared again, gliding silently between the trees. Her presence alone suffocated the clearing with terror. The child pointed at her and whispered, "She's waiting. I'll go with her if we don't act fast." The father tried to hold him back, but an invisible force shoved them all away, as though the forest itself refused to let them escape. Deeper inside the forest, they discovered an ancient symbol carved into a massive stone, wrapped in slowly twisting roots. The mother felt the cold seep into her bones, and the father realized this symbol might hold the only secret to their survival. But time was slipping away, and the shadows drew closer, their voices rumbling softly, "You will remain here forever." Despite the fear, the boy stretched out his hand and touched the symbol. Suddenly, a strange energy surged through the clearing. The shadows faltered, retreating as though their bond to the forest had weakened. The father grabbed his wife and child, urging them to retreat slowly back toward the house, clinging to the fragile hope of escape. But the mother noticed something terrifying. The boy's shadow had grown longer, moving at times independently of his body, as though a fragment of the darkness had remained within him, silently watching. The father shuddered, realizing their survival was only temporary. The village and its shadows would never truly release them, no matter how far they ran. After their temporary escape from the forest, the family realized the shadows had never truly left them. Every corner of the house was cloaked in something unseen. Even in broad daylight, the rooms felt heavy, suffocating with an unexplainable weight. The boy grew quieter, staring endlessly at the walls, sometimes pointing at the dark corners and whispering, "They're watching us. We won't survive unless we act." The mother began to dread sleep itself. Each time she closed her eyes, vivid dreams consumed her, visions of the village, of the faceless woman, of strange, glowing symbols carved into the earth, and of her son moving closer to the shadows, as if he already belonged to them. Every dream made her wake trembling, drenched in fear. Peace no longer existed within the house. The father chose to confront the terror rationally. He searched tirelessly for any book or ancient text that might explain what was happening, desperate to find a secret to free them from the curse. After days of searching, he stumbled upon a small, dust-covered book in an abandoned library. Its pages spoke of dealing with shadows, of mastering or banishing them. One line stood out: "Those who learn the secret will survive. Those who ignore it will become part of the shadows forever." That night, the boy suddenly screamed, "They're here! They want me!" The mother rushed to hold him, while the father struggled to make sense of what was happening. The air thickened, shadows gathered in the corners of the room. Slowly they merged into the shape of the faceless woman, moving deliberately, her silence more terrifying than any sound. The boy began muttering in a language neither parent understood, as if some ancient force spoke through him. Terror surged. The walls seemed to bend, the floor trembled, and the air itself swelled with whispers. "You will remain here forever." Clutching the book, the father guided his wife and son, chanting the incantations inscribed within its pages. The moment the words left their mouths, a surge of power erupted, pushing the shadows back. The faceless woman faltered, her form unraveling, dissolving into nothing with each syllable. For the first time in weeks, silence filled the house. As the first light of dawn crept across the sky, the family felt an uneasy calm, but the mother's eyes widened in dread. Her son's shadow moved strangely, longer, shifting unnaturally as though alive. The father understood. Their victory was only temporary. Part of the shadows had bound itself to the boy, silently watching, waiting for the moment to return. After using the incantations from the ancient book, the family felt a fragile peace for the first time in days. Yet each of them knew the shadows had not vanished completely. A fragment of their strange power remained bound to the boy. The mother noticed his shadow moving on its own at times, as though testing them, watching every word, every action. In the following days, the boy began to behave strangely. He would stop suddenly, stare into the corners, and whisper incomprehensible words, as though the shadows themselves were speaking through him. Fear consumed the mother, who realized that the ancient force might already be spreading inside him. Time was slipping away before it fully claimed him. The father decided to return to the forest, to the very place where it all began. He believed that confronting the source of the shadows might give them one final chance at survival. Armed with a lantern, they walked the narrow path through the dense woods. Each step echoed unnaturally, and the shadows slithered around them as though trying to block their path to the heart of the power. Deep within the forest, they found the ancient symbol carved into a massive stone, surrounded by roots that writhed slowly, like enormous arms reaching to seize them. The air was heavy, cold seeping into their bones. Whispering voices closed in from every direction, screaming silently, "You will never leave." The boy screamed, "She's here! I can't resist!" The mother clutched him tightly as the father began to chant the words from the ancient book. Instantly, the shadows lashed violently, coiling around them as if to drag them into the earth. Each word of the incantation forced the darkness back, yet it did not disappear. It shrieked with muted fury, filled with rage and warning. Then something unexpected appeared, the faceless woman. She stood among the roots, silent, but her presence alone was enough to paralyze them with terror. The boy pointed at her and cried, "She will take me! I can't escape!" The father tried to hold on to him, but an unseen force hurled him back, as though the forest itself had become a living entity, unwilling to let them go. As the chanting continued, the faceless woman began to fade, the glowing symbols on the ground dimming with her. The ancient force weakened, temporarily. The father grabbed the boy and mother, urging them back toward the house, but the sense of danger never lifted. The boy's shadow had grown darker, denser, and more alive than ever before. The mother knew something had taken root inside her son, an eternal bond with the shadows. The father realized their escape had never been final. The horror born in the village would follow them always, waiting patiently for the right moment to return and to claim them. After returning from the forest, the family felt that the peace they thought was temporary had become more fragile than ever. Every room in the house was filled with a heavy presence, and the child would sometimes whisper words that no one could understand, as if a part of the shadows was speaking through him. The mother began to feel a constant fear, as though everything around them could turn into a threat at any moment. One night, they awoke to the sound of heavy footsteps upstairs and faint knocking on the doors and windows. The child began screaming, "They're here! They want me!" The mother clutched him tightly, and the father shone the flashlight into every corner, but he saw nothing, only the shadows moving mysteriously and menacingly across the walls. As the days passed, they started to notice stranger phenomena becoming more clear. The pictures on the walls began to shift. The shadows formed into twisted faces, moving independently before vanishing suddenly. The child refused to sleep alone anymore, insisting on staying close to his parents throughout the night, his eyes filled with fear and confusion. The father decided to search again for any way to end this nightmare. He began studying the old book once more, looking for methods to strengthen the incantations and find rituals that could put an end to the shadows. He found a chapter describing how to expel dark energy through specific symbols and a small fire. But the process was dangerous, and any mistake could make the situation worse. One night, as they attempted the ritual, the shadow surrounding the child grew denser and more ominous, moving independently and whispering in muffled voices, "You will not escape. You will remain here forever." The mother felt a strong shiver course through her body, and she began to sense that the evil energy was seeping into the entire house. Suddenly, the child began speaking in a voice that was not his own. "The faceless woman, she's waiting for me. I cannot resist." The father tried to calm him, but he felt the same terror, as though part of the shadows had entered him and taken control of some of his actions. Every step they tried to take was difficult, as if the very air had grown heavy, preventing them from moving freely. Then came the moment they had not expected. The faceless woman appeared in the room, moving slowly between the furniture, silent but radiating power. The shadows gathered around her, enclosing them from every side. The father and mother realized that facing the shadows directly would be their final attempt to save the child, and that any hesitation might allow the darkness to claim him completely. With the chanting of the incantations written in the old book, the shadows began to retreat temporarily, and the faceless woman gradually dissolved into the air, leaving behind only a fleeting sense of calm. But the mother noticed that the child's shadow had grown longer, denser, and darker, as though a part of that energy had not vanished, watching them silently, waiting for the right moment to return. The fragile peace they had felt did not last long. The child grew more restless, staring into the corners, whispering incomprehensible words, as if a fragment of the shadows still controlled him. The mother began to sense that every movement, every sound, might be a sign of the terror's return. One night, they awoke to the sound of repeated knocking on the doors and windows, muffled screams seeping through the walls. The child cried out, "They're here! They won't let me go!" The mother held him tightly, while the father swept the flashlight across the room, but saw nothing, only the shadows sliding eerily across the walls. As the days passed, the phenomena worsened. Pictures on the walls began to move, shadows twisted into grotesque faces, shifting and disappearing without warning. The child refused to sleep alone, clinging to his parents at night, his eyes filled with fear and confusion. The father decided to return to the forest, to the place where it had all begun. With a flashlight in hand, they walked the narrow path between the dense trees. Each step echoed strangely while the shadows moved around them, as if trying to block their way to the heart of the power. Deep in the forest, they found the ancient symbol carved into a massive stone, surrounded by roots that moved slowly, like giant arms reaching out to seize them. The air was heavy, the cold seeping deep into their bones, and muffled voices surrounded them from all directions, silently screaming, "You will never leave." The child shrieked, "She's here! I can't resist!" The mother clutched him desperately while the father began chanting the incantations again, guided by the old book. Suddenly, the shadow surged violently, wrapping around them, dragging at their feet as if to pull them into the earth. Each word of the ritual forced the shadows back, but they did not vanish. Instead, they shrieked in muffled rage, filled with hatred. Then, something appeared that none of them expected. The faceless woman. She stood among the roots, silent, but her presence alone was enough to spread paralyzing fear. The child pointed at her and screamed, "She will cake me! I can't escape!" The father lunged toward him, but an unseen force hurled him backward, as though the forest itself had become a living entity determined to keep them trapped. With the relentless chanting of the incantations, the faceless woman began to fade, and the glowing symbols on the ground dimmed, as though the ancient power had been forced to retreat, at least for now. The father grabbed his wife and child, and they fled back toward the house. But the sense of danger never lifted. The shadow clinging to the child grew darker, denser, more alive. The mother felt it. Something remained inside him, a part of the darkness bound to his very being. The father realized their survival had not been victory at all, and that the horror born in the village would never truly die. It would follow them, silently, patiently, waiting for the right moment to return. After returning from the forest, the family felt that everything around them had become darker, more dangerous. The house was no longer a safe place. It had turned into a stage for strange noises and shifting shadows. The child had grown unusually quiet, staring motionless into the corners, as if a fragment of the darkness was alive inside him. One night, they all awoke to the sound of heavy footsteps upstairs, followed by scattered knocking on the doors. The child began to scream, "She's here! I can't resist!" The mother clutched him tightly while the father swept the flashlight across the room. Yet he saw nothing, only the shadows crawling across the walls in terrifying shapes. The days that followed were filled with constant unease. Every small sound sparked terror. Every flicker in the dark made the child cry and scream. The pictures on the walls slowly began to move, and the shadows twisted into distorted faces, faces that shifted independently, then vanished, leaving only dread behind. The father returned to the old book, desperate to understand the secret of the shadows. He found a chapter that spoke of a connection between the child's inner strength and the darkness. That part of the shadow might remain bound to him forever if the ancient energy could not be controlled. As night fell, the darkness around the boy thickened, growing heavier, moving on its own, whispering chilling words. "You will never escape. You will remain here forever." The mother felt cold creeping into her bones, while the father realized the truth. The ancient force had never left them. The horror had become part of their daily lives. Suddenly, the faceless woman appeared in the center of the room. She moved slowly between the shadows, silent, but her presence carried a suffocating terror that filled the space. The child pointed at her, screaming, "She will take me! I can't escape!" The father rushed forward to grab him, but an unseen force hurled them backward, as though the room itself had become a living entity, refusing to let them fight back. With the desperate chanting of the incantations from the old book, the shadows began to retreat, and the faceless woman faded slowly into nothingness. For a moment, calm returned, but the mother noticed something chilling. The child's shadow had grown longer, denser, darker, as if a piece of the ancient energy still clung to him, watching in silence, waiting for the right moment to return. The fragile calm inside the house did not last long. The boy grew quieter than ever, yet his empty stare remained fixed on the corners of the room. He whispered strange words no one could understand, as if a fragment of the shadows still had control over him. The mother felt that every sound, every faint movement might be the beginning of terror returning. One night, they were jolted awake by relentless knocking on the doors and windows. Muffled screams seeped from within the walls. The boy cried out in panic, "They're here! They won't leave me!" The mother clutched him desperately, while the father swung the flashlight into every corner. But he saw nothing, only the shifting shadows twisting ominously across the walls. As days passed, the strange phenomena only grew worse. Pictures on the walls began to move, the shadows formed grotesque shapes, faces disfigured and grim, appearing and vanishing in an instant. The boy refused to sleep alone, insisting on staying close to his parents, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The father finally decided to return to the forest, the place where it had all begun. With a flashlight in hand, they walked the narrow path between thick, suffocating trees. Each step echoed unnaturally, while the shadows moved restlessly around them, as if trying to block their way to the source of the darkness. Deep in the forest, they found the ancient symbol carved into a massive stone. It was encircled by roots that shifted slowly, like enormous arms reaching out to grab them. The air grew heavy, the cold pierced their bones, and muffled voices rose from every direction, screaming in silence, "You will never leave!" The boy began to shriek, "She's here! I can't fight her!" The mother held him tightly, while the father began chanting the incantations again, guided by the old book. Suddenly, the shadows surged violently, coiling around them as if to drag them beneath the earth. Each word of the ritual forced the darkness back, but it didn't vanish completely. It screamed in muted fury, filled with rage and threat. And then, something they had not expected appeared. The faceless woman stood among the roots, silent, unmoving, yet her presence alone was enough to summon a suffocating terror. The boy pointed at her in horror. "She will take me. I can't escape." The father tried to grab him, but an invisible force hurled him back, as though the forest itself had become a living entity, determined to keep them trapped. With repeated chanting, the faceless women began to fade, the carved symbols on the ground glowing weaker, as if the ancient force itself was being pushed back, temporarily. The father lifted the boy and led the family away from the forest. But the sense of danger never left. The boy's shadow grew darker, thicker, more unnatural. The mother could feel it. Something still remained inside him, a fragment of the darkness bound to him forever. The father understood survival had not been victory. The nightmare born in that village would follow them, waiting patiently for its chance to return. The relative calm after their return from the forest did not last long. The child became more isolated, staring into the corners in complete silence, as if a part of the shadows had settled inside him. The mother began to feel that every movement, every sound could be a sign of the horror returning once again. One night, the family woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps upstairs and intermittent knocks on the doors and windows. The child began screaming, "They are here! They will not leave me!" The mother held him tightly, and the father shone the flashlight in every corner, but he saw nothing except the shadows moving strangely across the walls. As the days passed, the situation grew stranger and more dangerous. The pictures on the walls began to move, and the shadows shaped themselves into distorted faces, moving independently and vanishing suddenly. The child refused to sleep alone, insisting on staying with his parents all night, his eyes filled with fear and confusion. The father decided to return to the old book once more, trying to understand the secret of the shadows more deeply. He discovered a chapter explaining that part of the shadows could remain tied to the child forever if they failed to control the ancient energy. With each passing day, it became clear that time was running out, and that part of the shadows inside the child was growing stronger. On a dark night, while they were attempting another ritual from the book, the shadow surrounding the child began to move violently, whispering in a muffled voice, "You will not escape. You will remain here forever." The mother felt the cold creeping into her bones, and the father realized that the ancient power had never left them, and that the horror had become a permanent part of their daily life. Then, the faceless woman appeared in the middle of the room, moving slowly among the shadows, silent, yet carrying with her a terrifying presence that filled the place with dread. The child pointed at her and said, "She will take me. I cannot escape." The father tried to grab him, but an invisible force pushed them back, as if the room itself had become a living entity, preventing them from resisting. With the repeated chanting of the incantations written in the old book, the shadows began to retreat temporarily, and the faceless woman gradually faded away, leaving behind only a fleeting sense of calm. But the mother noticed that the child's shadow had become longer and denser, as if a part of the ancient energy remained stuck inside him, watching them in silence, waiting for the moment. Several days after the last confrontation in the forest, the family felt that the atmosphere around them had become more tense than ever. The house was no longer a safe place, and every room contained shadows moving mysteriously. The child was silent most of the time, but he constantly stared into the corners and whispered incomprehensible words, as if part of the shadows was still inside him. One night, they all woke up to the sound of repeated knocks on the windows and doors, and muffled screams seeping from the walls. The child began screaming, "They are here! They will not leave me!" The mother held him tightly, and the father shone the flashlight in every corner, but he saw nothing except the shadows moving across the walls in a strange and terrifying way. As the days passed, the strange phenomena intensified. The pictures on the walls began to move, and the shadows formed into distorted faces that moved independently and suddenly disappeared, leaving a deep sense of fear in every member of the family. The child refused to sleep alone, insisting on staying with his parents all night, his eyes filled with fear and confusion. The father decided to return to the old book once more, searching for any chapter that could give them a chance to control the shadows or get rid of them. He discovered a chapter explaining that part of the shadows could remain tied to the child forever if they failed to control the ancient energy. With every passing day, they were getting closer to the possibility of losing control of the child completely. That night, while they were attempting another ritual from the book, the shadow surrounding the child began to move violently, whispering in muffled voices, "You will not escape. You will remain here forever." The mother felt the cold creeping into her bones, and the father realized that the ancient power had never left them, and that the horror had become an inseparable part of their daily lives. Then, the faceless woman appeared in the middle of the room, moving slowly among the shadows. Silent, but her presence alone was enough to cause unbearable terror. The child pointed at her and said, "She will take me. I cannot escape." The father tried to grab him, but an invisible force pushed them back, as if the room itself had become a living entity preventing them from resisting. With the repeated chanting of the incantations written in the old book, the shadows began to retreat temporarily, and the faceless woman gradually faded away, leaving behind only a fleeting sense of calm. But the mother noticed that the child's shadow had become longer and denser, as if part of the ancient energy remained trapped inside him, watching them in silence, waiting for the right moment to return. As the days passed, the feeling of danger became constant around the clock. Every room in the house was surrounded by a heavy atmosphere, and every small light moving on the walls filled them with terror. The child grew more silent and mysterious, staring into the corners and whispering incomprehensible words, as if part of the shadows was living inside him. One night, the family woke up to repeated knocks on the windows and doors and muffled screams seeping from the walls. The child began screaming, "They are here! They will not leave me!" The mother held him tightly, and the father shone the flashlight into every corner, but he saw nothing except shadows moving on the walls in a strange and terrifying way. As the days went by, the strange phenomena escalated noticeably. The pictures on the walls began to move, and the shadows formed into distorted faces that moved independently and suddenly disappeared. The child refused to sleep alone, insisting on staying with his parents all night, his eyes filled with fear and confusion. The father decided to return to the old book once again, searching for any chapter that might give them a chance to control the shadows or get rid of them. He discovered a chapter explaining that part of the shadows could remain bound to the child forever if they failed to control the ancient energy. Each passing day brought them closer to the possibility of losing control of the child completely. On a dark night, while they were attempting another ritual from the book, the shadow surrounding the child began to move violently and whisper in muffled voices, "You will not escape. You will remain here forever." The mother felt the cold creeping into her bones, and the father realized that the ancient power had never left them, and that horror had become an inseparable part of their daily lives. Then the faceless woman appeared in the middle of the room, moving slowly among the shadows, silent, yet carrying a terrifying presence that filled the place with fear. The child pointed at her and said, "She will take me. I cannot escape." The father tried to hold him, but an invisible force pushed him backward, as if the room itself had become a living entity, preventing them from resisting. With the repeated chanting of the incantations written in the old book, the shadows began to retreat temporarily, and the faceless woman gradually faded away, leaving behind only a fleeting sense of calm. But the mother noticed that the child's shadow had become longer and denser, as if part of the ancient energy remained stuck inside him, watching them in silence, waiting for the right moment to return. After all the previous confrontations, the family felt that horror had become an inseparable part of their daily lives. The house was no longer just a shelter, but a constant arena for shadows and frightening sounds. The child grew even more silent, staring into the corners and whispering incomprehensible words, as if a part of the shadows had permanently taken root inside him. That night, they all awoke to the sound of heavy footsteps echoing throughout the house, with scattered knocks on doors and windows, and muffled screams seeping from the walls. The child began to scream, "They are here! They will not leave me!" The mother quickly held him, while the father shone the flashlight into every corner, but saw nothing except shadows moving in a strange and terrifying way. The following days were filled with constant watchfulness and relentless fear. The pictures on the walls began to move, and the shadows shaped themselves into distorted faces that moved independently and disappeared suddenly, leaving behind a deep sense of dread in every corner of the house. The child refused to sleep alone, insisting on staying with his parents all night, his eyes filled with terror and confusion. The father decided to return to the old book for the last time, searching for any final ritual that could give them a chance to control the shadows. He discovered a chapter explaining that full control over the shadows was only possible if they confronted their true source and bound the child to the power again in a safe way. But he knew that any wrong step could allow part of the shadows to take permanent control of the child. That night, while they attempted the final ritual, the shadow surrounding the child moved violently, whispering in muffled voices, "You will not escape. You will remain here forever." The mother felt the cold creeping into her bones, and the father realized that the ancient power would not release them easily, and that this confrontation would be decisive. Then the faceless woman appeared once again, moving slowly among the shadows, silent, yet carrying a terrifying presence that filled the place with fear. The child pointed at her, saying, "She will take me. I cannot escape." The father held the child and the mother close, and they began chanting the incantations written in the old book, summoning all the strength they had left. With every word, the shadows began to retreat gradually, and the faceless woman dissolved into the air, leaving behind a sense of calm for the first time in weeks. The child, however, pointed at the shadow still clinging to him and said, "I feel she has not left completely." The mother and father realized that a part of the ancient power would always remain with them, a lasting memory of the horror they had lived through in the forgotten village. In the end, they learned that true survival did not mean the shadows had vanished entirely, but rather the ability to coexist with them and remain ever watchful. The forgotten village was not just a place, but a beginning of a world of mystery and terror that leaves its mark on all who dare to approach it.